also Paulo Alvarado. He did all the music, the sound design, and Gustavo Maldonado. The script is based on two poems or text by Gustavo, and we co-wrote the script together. Gustavo, hola. And finally, Alberto Jimenez. Alberto did all the production for the film. He did a really good job, an amazing job, and and also Gisela Sanders Alcántara. She did the editing of the film. Lola Sarabia, excuse me. All right, so I don't know if you want a question or questions, hola. Yeah, we did the premiere in Guatemala January 31st, which was the 26th anniversary of the burning of the Spanish embassy. And we wanted to do it that day because as a commemoration. Yeah, for the victims of the Spanish. Yeah.
Where is it in the movie theater? Where did it open up, just in general, in the movie theater?
The first day was in a film theater in Guatemala City, and then we screened the film for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, every day we did a different forum about the movie. So it was every day was about history or sociology or the politics involved with the burning of the Spanish embassy. And it was trying to talk about the civil war in Guatemala that is 20 years ago. It's a very recent past, but in Guatemala is something that has been trying to be forgotten. So the film deals with the Spanish embassy as a background, but it tries to open dialogue and.
Thank you.
I would like to say that in the couple of weeks that we saw the picture in Guatemala, it was quite successful with the audience, and more than 3,000 people came to the presentations so far.
And there was no political anything?
Well, in like the columnists at newspapers, a couple of them, there's a, ¿cómo se llama el tipo ese? Well, yeah, like people from different, journalists wrote about the film. So a little bit started to, because the Spanish embassy is still like a really hot topic or hard topic about. And so there's the ultra right, pero el otro tipo, ¿cómo se llama? Yeah, this guy Palmieri, he was in a way involved with the Spanish embassy. He was the Guatemalan ambassador in Mexico, and he is always defending the army and the action of the police. So it was interesting. We invited him a couple of times to see the movie. We were really interested to see what he would say about the movie, but he never came. But it was funny because in a moment we started to get a lot of media and people talking about the Spanish embassy, but he only wrote that he heard from some other people about the movie. So I don't know. And then a lot of people talk about that we are bringing the issue to young people, and definitely we open a different, way to see, a different angle to see the burning of the Spanish embassy. And definitely, there was people 20-year-old, they didn't knew about the Spanish embassy. So that was a big thing.
Some people say that movie from the police side is what some people say, no? That they want to make now a different side of the situation.
I don't know. Obviously, Guatemala has a very curious history, and the way of looking at it has always implied that we forget about what has happened there because it hurts a lot. And then one of the ways of sort of like putting down pain is just not talking about it. I know it doesn't solve anything, but that's the way a lot of people pretend to make it go into the past and just like not have to deal with it. And I think that this particular one is very interesting because the embassy, I mean, it's supposed to be Spanish land there because of all the agreements you have in political conventions about this. So how come the government just says, oh, there's some problem, someone's taking the embassy, let's just burn it down, I mean, just like that? And I mean, it wasn't like it was the decision of some stupid policeman. It was the decision of the government. They might not take responsibility for it, but it was the president and it was what we call the Minister of Defense there, which would be your secretary here, coming and saying, yes, we're going to go and burn down the embassy because we want to get rid of this problem. That is sort of the way they wanted to deal with it. And then, of course, you have to know that during those years, the beginning of the 80s, like all the violence, the government violence escalated to a position which was really very tough. You weren't safe if you just were outside on the street. I mean, you didn't have to do anything per se to get a bullet inside. So I think that it's something you would have to know the history about, to know in detail, to have an idea of what's going on here. But more than that, I think the film is talking also about the relationship between people, be it the government and the people as a whole, or a couple, like you can see here, or more interestingly, perhaps, between the authority or the authoritarian figure, like a priest, like a president, and his son or his subordinate. I think there's a lot of issues going on in this story.
Well, I would say, yeah, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to know if you guys could tell us a little bit more about the history of what happened at the embassy and what was going on in the country at the time. And also, you mentioned before that history is being forgotten, but I'm sure there's, and I'm sure your movie is part of this, I'm sure there's a struggle to bring that history back. So I would also like you to tell us a little bit about what is being done right now in Guatemala to bring back that memory.
Well, I'll introduce this and then I'll let Alberto tell you all the legal facts or stuff about this case. Yeah, because there's all this trail going on about this case, you know, special, and it's an international trail. Huh? So, well, I would say that, the central point of the film is not like the burning of the Spanish embassy, right? That's something I think we have very clear. It's a fiction that talks about a young couple that really suffers that past, you know? Like the past is upon them. They're carrying it on their shoulders, right? And you see, well, the characters are very like, you can feel that past in them, in their attitude in life, right? But then, well, afterwards, with this, we choose this moment because it was like a top moment in the internal conflict in the war, in the civil war in Guatemala. Because after that happened, you know, after they burned that, and they saw like the international community. Well, they say a lot, like all the time, right? But they didn't really came and say, well, we're gonna help these people, or we're gonna, we're gonna do something about it, you know, never do something. So the people in the government that time, especially the army, that they were supporting like the economical power over there, and they say, well, from this point, we can do anything, because nobody is gonna say anything, you know. And then there was this phase of the, first it was like a selective repression, and then after that point, exactly, it started like the
massive repression, massive repression. And well, that's why we think this point of history in our country is so important, because after that everything was possible, You could wait anything from them, and well, one of the purposes of the film is that it's very clear that we wanted to open the dialogue in our country, because this past is like buried, it's buried. And people doesn't talk much about that, and people really just want to forget. But it's like very superficial, It's just like saying, oh, it just happened. But we really want to open a dialogue, right? Roberto?
About what is going on with the case of the Spanish embassy in the court, no? We could say that in Spain, for example, the case is open. The national audience, through the judge Baltasar Garzón, they carry on with the case, and is now accused. The same as Pinochet. It's the same judge that is carry on with is taking the case of Pinochet, and now there are 3 people that is clearly direct involved with the responsibility of the case, and it's Donaldo Álvarez. He was Internal Affairs. Later it was Romeo Lucas, he was the president, and Chupina, he was the chief in charge of the police. But this is through, how would you say this? Una acusación? An accusation from the Fundación Rigoberta Menchú. Rigoberta Menchú, his father died in this event, no? And so far it's quite stopped, because what the Fundación Rigoberta Menchú is trying to do now is that the familiars from the your people don't make an accusation, a private accusation, because if not, the case is going to go to the Guatemalan court, and they could stop it. But in the Guatemalan court, so far, the only case that is open related with this is the case against Máximo Cajal, the ambassador at this time. It's the only case that is for collaboration with the guerrilla.
I might say that all the people who were inside the embassy at the moment of the attack died. The curious thing is that the ambassador managed to escape. So at first it seemed like perhaps he was just lucky, or he just ran for his life, But this accusation points to the fact that he possibly was in cooperation with and in collaboration with the people, because he knew what was going on. I mean, at that level. And besides, there was someone else. There's one member of the group of people who were there making their demands, who didn't die in the embassy, because apparently he was buried under the other people, so that preserved him from suffering the effects of the gases and the burning. So he actually survived the burning of the embassy, and he was taken to a hospital with custody and everything. And there exists a recording of someone who went to the hospital and actually interviewed him there 25 years ago, or 26 years ago, and he said this phrase which appears here: "Saber quién puso fuego ahí." I mean, I wonder who burnt this down. I mean, who set fire to it? And a day or 2 days later, he was abducted from the hospital and killed. Oh, it's one day, and the next day he was abducted and killed. Although he had police custody within the hospital, within his room, So you can see how very tightly knit all this was. You have a question? Oh, and his name was Gregorio, which is also simple.
Mm-hmm. And 2 people more died in the sepelio. ¿Cómo se dice sepelio? In the burial, no? 2 people more died because of the police guns, no?
Yes, the police attacked the people at the time of the burial and killed 2 people more.
Some more people died.
And as all this was taking place in one of the locations which you saw here, which is the so-called Paraninfo, the old school of medicine in Guatemala, this was one of the locations which was favored for for the film for symbolic reasons.
The film has not a didactic character, no meanings. So it will be important to understand all this, that the peasants will come in from the Quiche area to protest because of what was going on there, no, at the moment. But they went to the radio, to the mass media, everywhere, and everywhere were closed for them. They didn't want to publish what they were trying to say to the international community. And first, they threw about to take over the Panama embassy. But later they changed their mind because of the security reasons. No? It was easier to take the Spanish one.
Yes, I think Alberto has a point there. It's not really, well, also Gustavo said it, it's not really that the film is about the burning of the embassy. It's more like a provocation to think about all these things. And for people who don't know about Guatemala, maybe, we hope, an invitation to find out a bit about it and know about what was going on.
I can't speak English, but I'll try. I think that this picture is the point of view of another generation that don't live really, because they have 7 years when this was successful. Then it's generational. He feels like the things they were, and the burning is still alive in Guatemala and in Spain too. Always the 31 of January, they always make the TV and all the things that they can do, because they have a lot of people, not a lot of people, two people that die Spanish, and the other people was die in Guatemala, and then they're beginning a big ¿cómo se dice? Como éxodo. No éxodo. See, a big éxodo of people that run away. I was run away 2 years before, antes. Before. 2 years before, then I don't leave this. But my theater, my group of theater, were in apoyo con los, and supporting with the labor union, labor that were in the embassy, and they died born, everyone. Then I think that before this movement, it comes golpe de Estado. Bueno, un golpe de Estado. No, sí, bueno, eso. En el que pusieron that became a new general that was coming to save Guatemala, that was el general Efraín Ríos Montt. This part of the history is before Ríos Montt. Then they became the repression in the biggest see, and then was when the community international became to gave us a democracy, a formal democracy, because they want that at the end we have a formal democracy. And now we don't know where is the democracy, formal or informal, or real democracy. But I think that the important thing in the picture is that is a point of view of another generation, that feels like that like this, and that with this picture is beginning a new discussion about this trouble. Someone wants.
I'll just speak out loud. It does feel like it's from somebody else's point of view, and I was going to ask up front and from discussion, but maybe I thought it would come up.
was, but he left. But he left the country because of that.
I see. Did you involve anyone who witnessed?
He was involved with a beer company that gave support to the labor unions that were supporting the campesinos that went into the Spanish embassy. Well, he needed to leave Guatemala because they tried to kill him in direct order to this general because he was part of this beer company. And so he left to live in Spain for 20 years. And he was doing theater and movies in Spain. But he left because he was involved in social movements and this theater company that gave support to labor unions.
How about during the production? Did you actually meet people? Did people come forward? People who witnessed or knew a lot about being older than you actually?
No, we didn't. Alberto?
For example, small characters, no? But for example, is Ana Isabel Bustamante. She's the doctor or one of the disappears. And who else? But yes, but we met a lot of people, familiars from the direct, people burned. We saw the picture with Rigoberta Menchú. Her father died on the embassy. More people, yes. And some of the students that joined the people to get into the embassy, they saw the picture too. Yes.
In fact, this witnessing of it would have been very coincidental, I think. You would have had to be there. But what I do remember is that I saw the people from I saw it on TV because I just happened to see the news that day on TV and they showed what they had filmed. They managed to get into the embassy and there were the charred bodies of the people who had been burnt because they had gas applied to them so they couldn't move. They were immobilized and you could see them just sitting there, completely burnt, I mean, black, charcoal black. And you just saw them, like figures in a wax museum, only that black, completely charcoal black. And I mean, it's real life and you think it's fiction, you just see it, like CNN telling you about the war somewhere. And then you just see this there and that's the image I have of it. If that is being a witness, I don't know. I was 18 at the time. Well, I'm the oldest of these guys here.
Well, yeah. It should, but no, okay, I'll give you the word. I just want to make a comment. Well, all of us, well, not all of us, he wasn't, but we were like 7 or 8 years for that time, right? And then we were not like witnesses direct, we were not in the front of the embassy, but we really suffer the war, and we're still suffering, and the causes of the war, the things that origin that conflict, they're still there, and we're still suffering that, right? So we weren't there. We were not there. I was like involved in some way in this conflict. My family had to go out of the country and all stuff, but it doesn't matter. All of us were like witnesses of the suffering and the violence in our country for that time,
I just wanted to ask you if the media in Guatemala tried to censor this film recently. And one basic question I have, I know this is not a very this is very recent history, because if this happened in 1980, that was at the time that Archbishop Romero was killed in El Salvador, where I'm from. And I was a child, and I remember, and like you said, the war is still impacting us. And I know Guatemala had a really bloody war, much, much longer than El Salvador's. But my question is, what was the position of the Spanish embassy at the time in terms of what was going on, the political conflict, the civil war? And what did the Guatemalan government say about it, about the burning down? Because that's just like what happened, but there was something behind it within everything else that was happening in Guatemala. And I just want to congratulate you, because I know how important this is for the the newer generations of Guatemalans and all over the world to recover this historic memory. And I know during the peace accords there was a truth commission established that I imagine you're doing similar work, trying to recover the historic memory that needs to be alive and continue to be passed on and talked about, and so that we can bring justice sometime, because that didn't happen.
Oh, thank you. Well, at that time, the embassy was burned. They didn't say much, But the ambassador, that Máximo Cajal, as well, they were like trying to put him like he was un cómplice. No, un cómplice. Sí, accomplice of he was in accord with these people, The fact was this: they came from the countryside, lots of people. They in a like long march, and they marched to the city, and they were asking to stop the violence. That was like a peace march, right? So the only way that they thought they were going to be listened, not just in Guatemala but outside the country, was like to occupy an embassy. And it was like, they say it was like a decision of, it was easier to occupy this embassy than another embassy, so they took over this embassy, Well, and they got burned, and afterwards, the government, what the government said, it was like, they burned themselves because they got these Molotov cocktails and they started and they burned themselves. That was the government's version, And
yes, I was going to add that there was in the paper. I remember reading how the government said, we are very sorry for what happened there. Like, someone set something off there, and we're sorry about it, but it wasn't us, That was the official reaction, because as Gustavo just said, I don't know if you noticed it was too fast, but one of the headlines was, se autoinmolaron, they decided to take their own lives. And that was the position of the media, which was very hardly censored by, and has been by the government, and is usually just trying not to lose their advertising, So that's all the interest. There's no real projects, and there's no real newspaper project, no journalists projects in Guatemala. It's more like, well, we have some kind of shop here, and what we do is we sell newspaper. It's not like, that's what it is a bit like. Well, yes, at the time, Spain cut, what do you call this, severed relations, yes, cut diplomatic relations, and...
Try to say another thing, and when I came to Spain, I was in 1978, 2 years before, and I asked for the refugio, the political refugee, and they say me that in Guatemala was democracy because there was elections every 4 years. Then 2 years later, they burned the embassy, and I asked for the political refugees again, and I have it. That was in...
Because of the events, as consequence, they cut the relationship between Spain and the Guatemalan government. It was the first time that Spain did that with a Latin country, but not in the contemporary history, the whole history. The first time and the last, actually. For 8 years. Spain asked for an excuse, because of what happened, but they never got it.
Formal democracy was reestablished. Well, it wasn't established till '86, so it took them another couple of years to recognize that now it was a formal democracy. So that's why it took that long, I think. What he asks is like how widespread is the trauma in Guatemala concerning this kind of events. I would say there's several effects you can see in Guatemala. For example, people don't tend to gather to get something done or to change something. It's easier to say, look, that's the way it is, and so leave it that way. But I think that is not fair someone might say, yes, it's not fair, but it's going to be more trouble in the end, so just sit down, just relax, take it easy. And that is one of the consequences of this period and even earlier periods. For example, in the 30 and 40 years in the 1930s, 1940s, we had like a very repressive government. At the time, it was very much simpler to control people. There wasn't such a large population, and just one general was able to supervise everything and tell everyone off, and all that. But this made it very acute, and I think that's one of the effects you see. People don't want to get together, and they don't know why, but they've learned to behave that way. I mean, young people now. On the other hand, you do have like efforts and initiatives to try to do something about it, but it's mostly like, very isolated efforts. Maybe someone comes up and says, okay, we should commemorate the death of these people. And they will commemorate it. I remember last year there was like a commemoration in the central square in Guatemala City. And then you had like artists come and sing and play the guitar and all that and give discourses and hand out, printouts and all that. And that's it. But the case that is being made for this is like the most important part of it. Of course, that's on the legal level. I think that this goes beyond that. It's not just like we're making a bit of noise about it. I think there's also an aesthetic point in this, which is in the end the purpose of art, I would say.
Actually, yeah, I moved so I could reach the microphone. I actually wanted to ask about the aesthetics of the film and why you chose to tell this story in this particular way, and in particular why you chose this form to make to provoke this kind of discussion about this historical event.
Well, it started when I read Gustavo's text, and then when we started to do the adaptation to the script, and we wanted to make. Because it was the story of the couple, especially of the woman, and then we wanted to connect it with Guatemala society, in Guatemala's history. So when we wrote the script, we thought that, in a way, Constanza's character, she represented, in a way, Guatemala's society. So that's how we connected. And then also we started thinking, okay, in which way we could connect it to the history. And immediately, well, not immediately, but we thought about the burning of the Spanish embassy because it means so much for people in Guatemala's memory, So then is when we thought about the burning of the Spanish embassy, and then we thought about Gregorios, the boyfriend, that he could be a son of this general. Because then it's a direct connection with the burning of the Spanish embassy, because that president is the one that gave the order to burn the Spanish embassy. So it was, in a way, put it in context at this moment and looking back at what happened in Guatemala. And then the aesthetics, we use different formats. We shot in 16 millimeters in Super 8 and 24p, that's a digital format. And we thought about something trying to portray society, and with film something to be more aesthetic, and then with video to be more a documentary approach, like streets and things like that. So I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, it was a point. We wanted to make something like a audiovisual anthropology in first, with the use of this format, right? The digital format, like to make some documentary stuff, like the streets, like Mara said, the way we interact in the public space. Well, then the 16 millimeter, like the straight to the fiction, right? And then the 8 millimeter was like the point of view of the characters. Huh? I don't know if you noticed that, but because it's too mixed. Well, but mix is something like. Well, it's good for us. We wanted like to present or to transmit all this idea that the world and reality, not only in Guatemalan history but all around is like dispersion, you know, and it's like going in all direction, and it's like amorphous as well. It's not. We're always looking for some securities to find things like true or stuff like that the human beings been searching for all around, because it's also always afraid of this amorphous reality, huh? So that's something about like the aesthetic thing and the first, like, I don't know if philosophical or foundation of the film.
You're going to say something?
Well, I am the editor of the film, and I am not from Guatemala. I had actually to read a lot about, put myself in context, but because, as they said, there was a war, and the peak of this was the burning of the embassy, and after that, it was kind of like free license to do whatever. But what I wanted to say, pretty much adding to what Gustavo and Mario had said, is like, yeah, definitely the amorphous. It's something that it's really like the core of the film. It's definitely the story of this couple, but this kind of reality that it's kind of like all chopped. You can see like in many moments, Actually, for me, it was even hard to get the film because it's chaotic. It's, you see like how, and actually it's the statement of this artist. It's like what we state is that life is chaotic, and all what we perceive, because of what we got is like everything is like all over the place, and so you see like these isolated moments in which the camera focuses on the coffee, or focuses on something else, It's like little details that kind of like pop up, like it seems like it's kind of like out of the blue, but it's not. Everything has pretty much a reason, and then you see how like the story goes and then breaks and then comes back again. It's pretty much because of that, because there's like that position that reality is not straightforward, as not how you perceive things, So it's.
Sorry, before I would just like to add some more because it stimulates me to talk about something. I find that we had a very interesting discussion, especially Alberto and me, about whether the film wasn't going too much towards the genre of a video clip, like a long video for a song, because it had too much music. So we started cutting out the music. I was a musician, and yet I was cutting it out. I thought, no, this is too much. We're going to do more like a standard movie. And then Mario went back and said, no, I want music most of the time, and in effect, there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and a lot of pieces of music which don't have too much to do with each other, but when you look at them together, it's like looking at a collage. I mean, if you're near the painting, it's difficult to tell what anything has to do with anything else, but when you take some distance, you might realize, oh, yes, I see the figure now, I see the general shape they meant to put through. And that is what happened there. I think that we had so many elements that we had to make it this way. And people have asked, but what's the meaning of the film? I don't understand it. There's no story to it. What's going on? And the response to them is, well, does it have to have a meaning? Does it have to be linear? Someone? Yes, you go.
Is that the way you see your city, amorphous? Does that characterize it, especially, say, in the architecture? And if so, is that the result of things that happened during the revolution, or, excuse me, if it was a revolution, the Civil War, or does it predate that? Does it go back to, say, earthquakes or something else? Or, I mean, that's the way I see the city that you're showing in this film. And it kind of corresponds to the very brief experience I had of it when I was there. And I don't know why it's that way.
Well, the city is very chaotic, actually, but it's like, because it was like thought to be a small place, The city they started to build the city a long time ago, and it was like the vision was like for a small city, because cities were not that big that time, especially in our countries. And well, the city can be like a character or an actor in the film, but well, I don't think it's just Guatemala or just our city that is chaotic. Here is very chopped reality over. If you go out there on the street, it's more chaotic than Guatemala, really. It's like, you feel that, you know, the world is like that, reality is like that. That is a philosophical conception, not a conception of a space or a conception of a country. That's a conception of life that, well, we have shared in some way. But yeah, it actually is, because after that, you have this like historical downtown, and it's like that. But the rest of the city is it's amorphous. It's really amorphous. Yeah, and our reality as well.
Distinction between chaos, which is dispersion,
That's what I was
thinking. Impossibility to reconcile and join dispersed parts, but amorphous, which is just a shapelessness that you can't quite identify. And I have to agree with you. New York used to be more that way. It's taking a more uniform, or at least definite shape now. But I certainly see that in Guatemala.
Well, about the architecture at the beginning of the movie, you only see the characters in that space that they live, and then the beginning is the intro from it's not the suburbs, but like the outskirts of the city. That's the travel that she takes on the cab, and you see all the industrial part of the city, and it's also like a travel in time, because then she goes to like the downtown side that is like the old part of the city. So it's doing that trip.
And one historical fact about architectural stuff, it's like our town and most of Latin American cities were like built in this colonial way. It's a square, all the time. It's a square, and from this square, everything goes on. You know, this it's all like that. It's a square because it's the Arab influence in the Spanish culture or architectural something like that.
Maybe it's a lot of boring historical facts, but for example, it's curious to realize Guatemala has had 4 capitals or capital cities, and they were all destroyed. Well, not this one, but has almost been destroyed like 30 years ago by natural disasters like earthquakes and inundations and all that sort of thing. So this city was, the actual capital was erected in 1776, like 200 years ago, a bit more. And then in 1976, it was again hit by a very strong earthquake. And I think that up to that time, more or less, the city had been sort of amorphous, not amorphous. It had some sort of shape. It had lasted that long without needing to take serious action about, you know, problems with traffic and all that. But these recent 30 years have been very, very chaotic, and they have contributed to make an amorphous city. So it's a bit of both, you know, it's both amorphous and chaotic. I think that we would have to go into a very long discussion about the character of the city, the fact that Guatemala was the metropolis of the Captaincy General, and so on and so on. And then you would find like a number of reasons why it is the way it is.
I just wanted to say, to add about what Gisela said, talking about editing and the aesthetics of the film. I definitely see what you're talking about all these fragmentations that happen in time and in space also. The way the director manipulated this, I see it more, and that's my personal approach, as a deconstructivist piece. My question is, did you purposely try to manipulate the actors or the characters in the movie? Because at the end of the film, you talked about Constanza being Guatemalan society, but at the end of the film, I see all these stereotypes, the power, the society of Guatemala, and the victim, which is Gregorio. He didn't know what his father did, and as soon as he finds out, he becomes the victim in a very explicit act. My question is, don't you think that Guatemala nowadays is that victim?
But I think in any case, the two of them are victims. And, well, I think also that Guatemala is still like stuck in their past or in their past because they haven't been able to, how you say that? Move on from their past because since it's been trying to be hide or buried so it's still like an open wound, something that it haven't been healed. So the past is still so strong for people from Guatemala, for us. So I think definitely two of them are victims of our past.
Yeah, but as well, I would say that Constanza, it's kind of like as well the symbol of hope. I always liked the ending. How Constanza, she moves on. And I think that's kind of like that brings to the audience and to the Guatemala peoples used to say, that's what we have to do. We have to, to move on. We have to heal that and move on.
Well, the two characters that Roberto plays, I mean this priest and this general, well, they really represent all these powers, these dark powers that have been oppressed. The people in, I'll say it again, and not only Guatemala, the church has been an instrument of oppression since it was born. The idea of God has been a symbol of oppression since it was born, and the human being has been looking for it and searching for it because it's afraid of this amorphous reality, and it's always searching for securities, like to forget about its fears. And the Catholic Church was very involved in the conflict in both sides. Actually, we cannot say, but church itself is a symbol of a dark, very, very dark power in history of humanity. About what he said, I would like to say something. They're both victims, right? But that's two different attitudes about life. She chooses to move on from this past and leave it back there, and he stays. He wants to stay locked up all the time and inside there in these dark spaces, so that's maybe some static explanation of that. Yeah. Really? Okay. Yeah, Jose. In the world.
Well, I think about the Catholic Church in Guatemala. The Catholic Church was involved, like the institutional, like the head of the Catholic Church were on the side of the army. But like all the priests in the countryside, they were supporting the people. So they had like a dual thing. There was a lot of priests, a lot from Spain, a couple, and a lot of priests were killed. So, but in this case, I think he's representing more like that, like the head, the institutional side of the church. And they were not directly involved with the burning of the Spanish embassy.
I think myself that is not only a critic for the conservative statements, it's not only for the left ones. We think that the left politics are too close to the NGOs, for example, and they don't give proportions for the young people to get out from this desencant.
Yes, I think we have many readings here, but particularly on your question, I would say that it is not a particularly specific point of the film to talk about Catholic power or the church. It just happens to be that way in Guatemala, like it was during colonial times in Latin America and up to now. I mean, is there some other question, comment?
I don't know if I want to use the mic. Guatemala is, I believe, 80% indigenous. Yeah. I had the luck and the honor to host Rigoberta. It must have been in '86 when she was still in exile in Mexico, and she came on a tour. And I'm wondering if, in some ways, the chaos that we're talking about is a part of a historical trajectory that it doesn't begin with the arrival of the Europeans, but it's definitely that's a devastating event, the arrival of the Europeans on this continent, and everything since then, I believe, has been structured by that collision. And I'm wondering if in your country, the people who maybe led those movements in the countryside, and who were probably mostly in the labor unions, had begun this kind of process of understanding what their generations went through. I have friends who are Guatemaltecos, who are Latinos. They say our reality was different. We suffered. We were persecuted, but there was a degree of difference from what the other communities that I'm talking about went through.
Well, there's several points here, because, for example, I would say, in my personal case, I was very lucky. I mean, I grew up easily in a family there, and you would say, oh, petit bourgeois, little kid there, el hijo de papi, you know. But, for example, one of my cousins, I mean, his head appeared in a bag and his arm in another bag and that sort of thing, you know. So you know about it, you're involved in it some way. And yet, the way it happened in the city was very different from what happened, say, in the northwestern part, which is near Mexico, where complete towns were razed. They had this scorched earth politics or policy, I don't know what you would call it. And, I mean, they have a problem there with a guerrilla. Yes, and then let's apply the famous technique of getting rid of the population, because then you starve the fish, you know, it has no water to, you know the story. So, in this way, I think that what has happened in Guatemala has a lot of causes, and maybe we would have to pinpoint 2 or 3 which are like basic ones. When the Spaniards came in from Mexico into what is now Guatemala, they found a lot of little communities in a geography that is difficult to put together, because it is like highlands and lowlands, and it changes very quickly. And that didn't make for a strong resistance to Spaniards. I mean, in fact, they were fighting each other. So what happened is that if one of them was with the Spaniards, then they said, oh yes, we're going to go and get rid of our enemies at that point. So it wasn't like a very strong resistance to begin with. So then all this was just done in a way that it wasn't worth like getting rid of the people, like maybe it happened in Cuba. Cuba is full of black people now, and not of Indians there or indigenous people, because they just finished them off. And when they were finished off, they said, now we need someone else to come and do our jobs for us. So they got black people to come to Cuba. In Guatemala, that didn't happen. I mean, they used the indigenous people as their labor, and that was enough. There's a very small black community in Guatemala in relation to what indigenous peoples are. Yes, the Garifunas, but it's not significant. So the process is very different. But you know that from Mexico too, and from the rest of Central America, I guess. However, it is different in the different countries. I mean, each country has like a very different process. And that would be, I think, one of the things we would have to go into more, and how all this happened throughout history. This has been going on not only in 1 or 2 communities, it has been going on all over the place. I don't think of mentioning it because I don't see it yet as if it was a process of healing. It might be a starting point, that I agree with, but I think it's just a very basic level of recovery, and it's going to be a long time before we reach that point where you can say, okay, now an actual process of healing is going on. Maybe it's just my point of view. I think it's a very basic starting point at this time.